Hello and welcome once again to another edition of Good Books Radio. I'm your host this week, Dr. John Cook, and with me today is Scott Smith. The book is A Nobody for Everybody in 2016, and Scott Smith happens to be an independent candidate for president. Now, we're not advocating him particularly, but he's got some very interesting ideas in this book that we're going to talk about today, and I hope you'll give a listen. Scott has a background in Wall Street finance. He's what we call a serial entrepreneur, having co-founded companies in diverse industries: agriculture, finance, educational, media, and technology. He began his career as a pioneer grower of sunburst tangerines, helping to develop a market for the fruit and establish the variety's popularity in North America. In the 90s, Scott was an early pioneer in structured finance, developing the model for conduit financing. His model was adopted by Wall Street and used for securitizing many forms of debt. Scott founded Kids Magazine in 1995, which is one of the earliest examples of user-generated content. And during this period, Scott also served as a co-founder and board member of 2 nationally ranked charter schools in Colorado. He has done other work, too, in terms of patent-pending financial structure ideas in Phenotech, and he's a developer of a patent portfolio of financial structures that increase the yield on investments. And there's private equity funds, Blue Cheetah, a solution for porting legacy software to the cloud, and Fathom, a platform for creating social media applications. So we have a very talented author on the line. Scott, welcome to the program.
Thank you, John. A very nice introduction.
It's very interesting, your ideas on how to revolutionize our economy. But I'd like to start with the end of the book, because your last chapter talks about who you are, and these details about your various enterprises are part of it. But you also faced a life-threatening illness at some point, didn't you?
Oh, I did, yes, a couple of times. So that puts life in perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sure does. So at some point you found faith.
That's true, too. I think that sometimes it takes things like that for you to find faith. It's true.
Mm-hmm. So I'll ask a question with a little bit of irony in it, because you're running for president. I'm wondering, do you have $1 billion on which to run? Because that's about what it costs now.
It does, and in some ways that's a shame. You know, the political vote of the people ought to be based more on, hey, what are your ideas, and laying them out straight, and less grandstanding, but be it as it may, that is the way it is. The truth is, though, that the ideas that I've come up with have very strong support. It's a quiet support in the background right now with people on Wall Street, and there are plenty of people with deep pockets that are looking at this and saying, you know, this does need to be done. So I think in the end, our ability to raise money will be sufficient.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about the 3 planks of your plan, and let's start with financial settlement tax, FST. This is very interesting, a shift from our income tax approach. Our income tax approach is really not working, and the government's going into debt. Right. So let's talk about that a little bit.
That's right. I think what I'm fond of saying is that the problem is really rather simple. We are trying to run our 21st century economy on a 19th century operating system, old ideas. And income taxes were not a bad idea when they were first implemented, but today they do not work at all. If you put some numbers on it, you can see where we're headed and where there's a problem. The goal is to raise $4 trillion a year for government spending, and by taxing income, we're saying we're trying to get that $4 trillion out of a bucket that totals about $15 trillion. So if you took all of our income in this nation and totaled it, it's $15 trillion. And therein lies the problem, because you have to take too big of a chunk of the income in order to really raise that $4 trillion. In fact, we can't bring ourselves to do it, and we run about a $500 billion deficit every year, and we're now up to $18 trillion in debt and growing, and that is a problem.
Now, when you say there's $15 trillion that we earn in income, the $15 trillion in income, right. Is that solely individual income, or does that include corporate income as well?
That's personal income. Corporate income does add some to that bucket, but not that much. And corporations tend to run pretty lean and mean because it is a competitive world out there. And so there is a solution, though, and it is a very attractive solution, and it's one of these win-win solutions in which you look at it and says, who loses? And the answer is no one loses. This is just a better way of doing things than taxing income. And that is to tax what are called financial settlements. We'll talk about what that is, but compare the total amount of financial settlements each year, which are 4,500 trillion, to the 15 trillion in income. And you're realizing we're simply taxing the wrong thing. So with income taxes, even when you're coming in with an aggressive flat tax of 10%, which, by the way, continues running a deficit. Okay, so flat taxes, I think they're a pretty good idea, but they don't cut the mustard. And if you tax financial settlements instead, you wouldn't need a 20% or 10% or 5% tax. In fact, that tax rate could go all the way down to 0.1%. So what does that mean for somebody earning, say, $50,000 a year? Currently, if you're earning $50,000 a year and you total your Social Security, your Medicare, your income taxes, forget state taxes, just your federal taxes, at $50,000, you're paying over $12,000 in taxes. With a financial settlements tax, you'd be paying $50.
Okay, so if everybody is taxed on their financial settlements, and you talk about what every time you deposit a check, sell a stock, swipe your card at the grocery store, that's a financial settlement, right?
That's right. It's just for the recipient now. So when you're spending money, it doesn't cost you anything. But for the merchant receiving it, 0.1% is shaved off the top. And that's what does the trick. Yes, you've described it well.
Okay. So there's like $4 quadrillion in financial settlements.
Yeah,
and
you got the figure
that's
right.
an awful lot of money. But how do we still have disposable income like you're talking about? I mean, I lose 30%, something like that, of my income to income taxes every year.
Yep.
Where does the money come from in FSTs?
Well, that's what the beautiful part of an FST is. If you're no longer paying income taxes, no longer paying Social Security's taxes, you're going to have around 30% more disposable income. And so that money, now you're spending it. It goes into consumer spending. That raises the gross domestic production in our country. It fires up new jobs, and it supercharges the economy. Really, the projections are that the financial settlements, the amount of financial settlements out there, if we put an FST in place, they would grow because you're fueling consumer spending. You're also making it very attractive for the large multinational corporations to remove their money back into the United States because the U.S. now would have the most favorable tax rate in the world at 0.1%. The money that, say, Apple has over in Ireland comes right back into the USA. So you not only supercharge the economy, but you actually increase the movement of money and the amount of money moving, and that generates even more in surpluses.
So there's no incentive for offshore banking by corporations and wealthy people.
You're right. Yeah. The U.S. becomes the tax haven at that stage. So that money moves back to our country. Not only that, but you've got the money in the Middle East and you've got money in China that would come flooding in. And so you create a situation that is self-perpetuating in a very positive sort of way.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk more about the benefits, but first let's talk about where we are now. We're in deep debt, and it's growing every day, and a lot of that debt we owe to China. What are some of the other crises that we're facing as a result of doing things the way we do them with the income tax?
Well, when we're doing things the wrong way, we are quite literally driving our car into a brick wall at 90 miles an hour. It's inevitable. The amount of debt that we have doubles about every 10 years. We literally, even with the very low interest rate environment today, we are paying hundreds of billions of dollars out every year. And that is money that we just lose. It's gone. We're basically making countries like China and Japan that hold so much of our debt, we're just making them richer. And as a nation, that is not a good national strategy. So one of the financial settlements tax cuts the growth of our debt. So that's the first thing that it does. Not only does it supercharge the economy, but it stops that $18 trillion from growing any further. But that's not enough. The plan that I have outlined in my book would actually pay off that debt over a 5-year period. And remarkably, it's paying off that debt without austerity, without it coming out of the pockets of hardworking Americans. And if you think about where our economy is going today, we've got an enormous deficit. We have people being hamstrung, paying large percentages of their income. They're not spending that on the economy. That's just evaporating out of their pockets. Our debt is growing bigger. Our currency is becoming less stable. And we're really following the classic pattern of a large country who reaches wealth and then goes on the decline. And you can look back through 2,000 years of history, and you can see that happening to nation after nation. And it's the erosion of the viability of their currency system. And it usually comes from too high of taxes and exactly what we're doing. So the writing's on the wall. And if we don't make these changes, there are a lot of people who have pointed out that the next generation, they're going to be the first generation that are worse off than their parents. And that's the beginning of the end. The good news is we can turn it around in a very big way.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting to me, the bright new day that will dawn if we adopt this. I mean, we're talking about reversing our financial ill fortune in 5 years, right?
Oh, yeah. That's well, here's the remarkable part, too. Go back to that person earning $50,000 a year, okay? If we actually adopted all of the proposals that I'm making in there, because we haven't touched on banking 2.0, but let's say they're a homeowner. Okay, their mortgage payment is cut in half through banking 2.0. They're no longer paying those taxes. For $100 a year, not only could we have a balanced budget, but with a financial settlements tax of 0.2%, that person could also have a free college education and free health care. You're talking about a complete change to the economy if you treat the cash flows right. I like to say, I've got a presidential bid out there. Consider me to be putting a bid in to be the nation's plumber. And the only problem we have in this state is the pipes aren't designed right. And I can fix those cash flow problems, reversing them around. And there is an enormous amount of latent wealth in our nation if we just address it that way. So you go from a fairly dismal doomsday scenario to the dawn of a quite bright new day. And it is because we have powerful technologies. We're just not recognizing that we are in a new era of productivity in terms of how much can we produce and how much wealth can our society have. We are simply handcuffing ourselves with old-fashioned ideas about cash flow and taxation and government, and it's a modest change. It isn't really something that's that complicated to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's FST, and there's some great benefits there that mathematically make sense. Let's talk about your second leg of the plan, the banking 2.0, because this is a little radical, I think, from a banker's perspective.
Yes. Well, and to my delight, it's interesting because I have tried it out on a lot of banker friends of mine. That's my main sort of base of friends really come from the finance community. And I have to say, they all kind of go through the same path when they read that chapter on Banking 2.0. They start off reading it, and one guy over at J.P. Morgan said, I was shaking in my boots because I could see if this gets out in the public venue, it's going to get voted in because there's such a huge benefit to the consumer. And he said, and I was fearful of it. I didn't like it at first, but I saw it being so attractive. He said, by the time I got to the end of the chapter, I had completely changed my mind. I said, this guy's actually the banker's friend. Banking 2.0 is just the next way of doing banking, and we could actually do better as banks too. So Banking 1.0, where we are today, I consider to have come from the days of the gold era, when gold was money, and there was a cost to that gold, cost of funds. So the concept of banking operating off of a cost of funds, because they had to aggregate that money and then lend it out, that was the only way you could do it. That Banking 1.0 is the only way to do banking under a gold-based currency. But today, we have a central bank. We have a Federal Reserve. We are no longer tied to gold. And while that had certain risky ramifications, if done right, it also has benefits. So Banking 2.0 is the recognition that we create our own dollars. There is no real cost of funds from the central bank's point of view. We just print that money. The job of the central bank is to make sure we don't print money willy-nilly. I mean, you do not want to flood the money supply. However, there is no cost of funds. And if you envision banks as merely being service agents, door fronts, if you will, to the Federal Reserve, the way it would work is this. When you deposit money into J.P. Morgan or into any town USA bank, that money would actually be registered as a credit with the Federal Reserve. They would provide the service, a depository service. They'd provide the service of ATMs, all the services that they do today. But the money is not going into the bank. It's registered as a credit with the Fed, the source of money. Likewise, when you go to the bank and you want a loan, you qualify for the requirements, for the loan. That money then comes from the Federal Reserve, and the banking institution itself is a service agent that oversees that process. So they do all the same things they do today: qualify for the loan, originate the loan, they service the loan, they foreclose in the event that you're not making the payments, and they get the origination fee that they do today, and they also receive servicing fees, but there is no interest involved. Mm-hmm. There is no interest involved.
And does this affect bank's profit motive?
It changes it around a little. What it does is it allows small banks to compete with big banks. Okay, so you're getting back into a much more healthy environment. It isn't the amount of deposits you have on hand that matter. If it's always a relationship with the Fed, a small bank could make a $10 billion loan just as easily as a Goldman Sachs could. It's just a matter of servicing it and qualifying it. And the money is always going into and out of the Federal Reserve under that plan. So what that does for the homeowner is rather phenomenal. Or for the student loan, person who has a student loan, those payments, when you take interest out of the equation, those payments are cut in half. And what does that mean to the economy? That money is no longer being paid just for interest. It's not being lost in that sense. That money that you would have paid in terms of interest, you're now going to spend as a consumer. And when you look at it this way, we've really had two taxes going on. We've had the income tax and we've had the cost of interest. And I point out in the book, it's kind of an interesting fact that all five of the major world religions have at one time or another banned interest. And we always thought of that ban in the Bible on interest as being a nice guy type of thing. But the truth is when you really understand the economy and cash flows, you look at interest and you realize that the existence and the use of interest in an economy actually devalues the currency. It requires the money supply to continually grow, and it is devastating to the health of a country over a long period of time. So I look at that. I look at those scriptures in the Bible, and I say, they were way more pragmatic than we ever thought. It was simply math.
You know, and it's interesting, the distinction you make between the financial economy and the material economy. The one that really matters is the one that's producing goods and services. And we have so much focus on the financial economy that we're missing the boat on what really matters for revitalizing the economy.
Hallelujah. No, that was the basis of all of these solutions or revelations that I had, because it's been a quest in my life since mid-90s. I've been analyzing the economy, the flow of money, and at some point that light dawned, saying, wait a minute, we've got two economies running here. We've got the real economy we live in, the material economy, then we have this artificial, synthetic, giant economy, the monetary economy. Money was invented to facilitate trades within the material economy where we live. You know, what's it cost to fly to Mexico? What's it cost to get some food? But it's a tail that is wagging the dog. And if we come back to it and we say, wait a minute, we all exist in this material economy. What we're trying to do is optimize our lifestyles. You begin to realize, hey, some simple changes here. We can actually take advantage of the system that we have grown, and we can actually all benefit out of it in the material economy. That's the insight that leads to all these solutions.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked about two legs, the FST and Banking 2.0. Let's talk about the third part for just a bit. Are you talking about the coupon stripping for getting rid of the debt? Coupon stripping. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's an interesting one, and I quite honestly, as I put that together, I had a bit of trepidation because I was thinking, am I missing the boat here? Am I really accurate in my assessment? And again, I put it to financial friends and people with a background in economics, and it was actually the easiest one for them to accept in the end. And the observation is that we have essentially two forms of money out there. We have currency, which doesn't bear interest. It's money, the type of money you walk around with in your pocket. And then we have treasury bonds. And treasury bonds, the insight came to me years ago when I actually had a bearer bond. It's a treasury bond, but it's printed on paper, and whoever holds it owns it. It's just like money in that respect, right? You know, whoever holds that $100 bill has got that $100 bill. Whoever holds that $1,000 treasury bond is the bearer of it, has the $1,000. The only difference between a $1,000 bill and a $1,000 treasury bond was that the treasury bond had coupons on it. A coupon is what that term is for that interest payment for every 6 months, and it was all printed out there. You know, next June you get $50, then the following December $50, and it's printed out there for 20 years. And you hold this massive piece of paper, and you realize this $1,000 turns into $2,000. It's growing, and that's what a treasury bond is. And so my observation is that by issuing now $18 trillion in treasury bonds, we've flooded the money supply with $18 trillion, but bad money, because that $18 trillion over time turns to $36 trillion. And so we're printing money either way. We print money with currency. We also print treasury bonds, but the treasury bond is a dangerous type of money because it grows and it grows and it grows. And so it dawns on me, we would have been better off paying for the deficit with currency than with treasury bonds. And indeed, if you look at the composition of our $18 trillion in debt, the vast majority of it is accrued interest over the years. We would have really printed far less money if we had just printed the money to start with. And so you would say, well, gee, printing all that money in the form of treasury bonds, wouldn't that be inflationary? And the answer is, that's why bread was 10 cents in the 1940s and it's $3 today. Hello? It's why a college education was $10,000 in the 1970s and it's $200,000 today. Hello? Yes, it is inflationary. We have been our own worst enemy, and we can simply end it by replacing those treasury bonds with currency. Now, you can't go print $18 trillion of currency and dump it into the market today. It wouldn't actually be inflationary, but there's no home for it. The markets aren't big enough to absorb that. But you can do it over 5 years. And here's the rub in it. This is what's pretty fascinating. China buys our treasury bonds because they want to keep the dollar strong so that they are able to sell goods to us at a low cost. They have no interest in our currency degrading in value. They want it to be higher. And if we were to send them a check for $1 trillion to replace the trillion they hold in treasury bonds today, you can bet your bottom dollar it's not going to weaken our dollar. It's not going to cause inflation. They're going to simply quietly reinvest that, and problem's done. It's a strategic advantage to the United States to pay it off that way. It's actually an incredible solution to what is otherwise a growing and eventually insurmountable and deadly problem for our nation.
Mm-hmm. So a couple of concerns that people might have as they go through this, it sounds fantastic, and I hope we can revolutionize the economy before it's too late. One of them is there's always the fear of what I'll call, for want of a better term, tax inflation. If we're doing so great at 0.1% per settlement, how about 0.2%, thus making the government, coffers deeper?
Yeah, that comes up frequently when I talk about this, and it's what you need to do is actually put that in perspective, because honestly, that was my first reaction: is, oh my word, if you come up with this efficient of a system, what are the senators going to? Congress is going to go nuts, and you begin to look at so a tenth generates $4.5 trillion, okay. And that's $0.5 trillion more than they have today. They will find easily a way to spend $0.5 trillion, I'm sure. 2/10 is $9 trillion. At some point in time, 3/10, you're getting 12, 13. You're getting into huge, enormous numbers, and you're talking about, how much more would you actually spend on the military? There comes a point in time when you're really not under the pressure to just spend and spend. The reason we have this sense of spending getting out of hand is because to date it's always been a reach into our pocket and pulling out. And so when the government is taking a third or a half of your income, you characterize it as a monstrous beast. It seems a monstrous beast, It seems like something you need to cut back. But if you're getting your national security, you're getting Social Security, you're providing welfare for people, you've got all of that stuff, and it's $1 out of every $1,000. It's a bargain. And if it turns into $2 out of 1,000, it's still a bargain. What are you going to spend another $4.5 trillion on? There does come to be a limit on what you can buy. Honestly, you can put twice as many roads in. You can build more schools. It's when there's an abundance. Sometimes it isn't. you're not looking at budgets the same way. You're not under that pressure to fight over every dollar. It's like there's plenty of dollars, and you funded the military at the level you wanted it at, and hey, you all go home and you're happy. It's kind of interesting to look at it from that perspective, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I've only got 2 or 3 minutes left, and I want to ask a couple more things, because at my age,
sure,
Social Security and Medicare are becoming really important, a focus for me. So how does this plan affect Social Security and Medicare?
Well, that's a very good point. Right now, Social Security is on the slide into bankruptcy. In other words, the money going out is more than the money coming in. That we crossed that line, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. We've got about 10 more years, and we're out. And so Social Security is a broken system today, but under the financial settlements tax, Social Security is rock solid. So it saves Social Security.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And the other question I have is, who would be against this, and why would they be against it?
I think there's fear on making such a huge change. I mean, everybody's going to look at it carefully, okay? But there aren't losers in this situation. We're so used to fighting over every scrap because of the income tax that the idea is that somebody's going to benefit, somebody's going to lose. But the truth is, in this situation, there aren't losers in it. You would see big banks would have less of an advantage than smaller banks. But at the same time, the guys at the big banks that I've talked to, they look at it and they say, actually this structure for Banking 2.0 allows us to grow our investment in our lending portfolios in ways that we've not been able to. We are able to become international financiers in a whole new way. So even the big banks look at it and say, I see some real bright sides to this. I do not think there are losers in this situation. We're so used to compromises that create winners and losers. It's hard to imagine that there was actually a way out there in which we all benefited, but that's what this solution is.
Very interesting. We're out of time, unfortunately, but we've been talking with Scott Smith. The book is A Nobody for Everybody in 2016. It's an easy read, and it makes a lot of logical sense, and I encourage you to pick it up and take a look at it. I remind our listeners that if you don't hear our broadcast on Public Radio 88 FM at its regularly scheduled times, you can also catch us on our YouTube channel, Good Books Radio, Strong and Cook. I'm your host, Dr. John Cook. Thanks for listening.